Welcome on to this edition of the Faster Beyond 50 podcast. It is great to have you with us. And today we're going to talk about how to know if you are overreaching or overtraining, the difference between the two, and how it can affect your training as an over 50s athlete. My name is Brad Nadalts. Good to have you with us, and even better to have the coach with us today because he's celebrating a birthday. Lindsay Parry, happy birthday.
Thanks, Brad. It's a really good day. Starting to feel a fraction like Groundhog Day, but so far I'm having a great day.
Yeah, let's just give some background here. This is about the fifth time we've tried to record this podcast because the system that we use just keeps crashing. So we've done this introduction. That was a pretty good introduction, I might add. I finally got it right. So let's hopefully this one sticks around, which is good. Lindsay, something I always ask my kids when they have a birthday: do you feel older today?
Brad, I don't. I actually feel really, really good today. I had an awesome night's sleep. But if you asked me this question last week, I definitely felt older, especially on Saturday. It was so cold. So even before everyone starts laughing in the northern hemispheres, it was below zero. Especially for Mark in Belgium, who likes to tease us about being born post-war. A saying in Belgium, apparently for people who are a little bit soft and complain easily. Um, but no, it was so cold, Brad. I went out, and obviously, while I was still running in the cement jungle and on the main roads, I got a bit warm in my gloves, beanie, and warm top. But as soon as I turned off the beaten track, and where I run is lots of open fields, farmsteads, dirt roads, and man, it got cold. So cold. So cold, in fact, that my sweat that I had now wet my beanie with actually crusted up and turned to ice. The frost was so thick that it looked like snow, and I actually started to malfunction. I had to cut my run short because I was worried I was going to be found lying and curled up in a ball. And I thought to myself at that stage, yo, I'm feeling like I'm getting too old for this. But yeah, but today I'm feeling good. I don't feel a day over 45.
If anybody wants to know why I left the same city that Lindsay lives in, because I just can't deal with the cold. So you can have it. I'm glad you're having it. We're having lots of rain. I've been dodging weather patterns to try and get out runs in the rain, and it just hasn't been happening. You mentioned, you talk about Groundhog Day. I don't know if it was in this recording or if it was one of the other ones we did, but you mentioned strength training. You did your strength training this morning. The good news is so did I. So it's the first time in a while. I know my post-comrades debrief, that was one of the things that I was really bad at, and I've just decided I have to take my meds, my minimum effective dose, Lindsay. That's what I have to take.
No, you got to. And Brad, I've actually decided to do something because I'm not terrible at strength, but I'm definitely not as good as I could be. I generally get to one, and often two. But to guarantee myself two, I'm going to do my sort of what I call my rehab session on a Monday, which I did. So yes, I've done my strength. Brad's done his strength. You guys go and do your strength. And then I'm going to join a class on Wednesday. I've got a couple of friends. There's 3 or 4 of us, and we're going to meet for a class on a Wednesday at 4 p.m. So I'm hoping that that's going to mean I'm going to do strength twice a week, every week. And then I'll hopefully on some weeks repeat my rehab on a Friday. And that'll be 3 sessions of strength a week. Because as we sit here, 11 weeks to Berlin.
Love it, love it, love it. And as you always say, 3 is ideal, 2 is better than 1, and 1 is better than none. So if you can get out there and do 3, what a win. All right, so we've switched over to another platform because it's crashed again. Lindsay, I'm not going through the introduction again. Let's jump straight into today's podcast. And that is the difference between overtraining and sort of overreaching. And it's quite an interesting topic, and the line can be blurred. But let's talk a little bit about what's the difference between acute fatigue, cumulative fatigue, ideally, essentially overtraining and overreaching.
Yeah, so Brad, the acute fatigue, I think in many ways is the easiest one. That's kind of the fatigue you feel specifically from a session, and that is typically from like a really hard interval session or from a really long training run. Those are the 2 workouts that generally produce the biggest acute fatigue, and the acute symptoms will last for between 1 day, 24 hours, and 72 at the most. So that's kind of probably the biggest defining feature between the two, acute and chronic, and that's that acute will get out of the system fairly quickly. And it's also why most coaches will not have two workouts or two hard workouts, and by that I mean a very long workout or a high intensity workout within 48 hours of each other. So that's kind of how they try to spread those out, to try and avoid those accumulative fatigue peaks, you want to call them that, of kind of flowing into each other. So that's typically it. And your signs of that will be things like a little bit of mild soreness or stiffness, fatigue. So quite often after a hard interval session or a long run, for example, the next run that you do, your legs feel a little bit tired or you feel a bit heavy. You might feel acute fatigue. In other words, you're really tired that day and like, oh my goodness, I just can't wait until bedtime comes around and I sleep. Your hunger might spike. So those are things that would derive acute training fatigue, and that's normal. So when we're training hard, and we're going to unpack this in more detail later. But when we're training hard, we expect our appetite to go up. We expect to be a little bit more tired. We expect to want to sleep more. So those are kind of the signs that you'll get from acute fatigue. Your more chronic fatigue, moving into overreaching, are when certain of those symptoms do not stabilize or normalize 72 hours or longer. And a lot of runners make the mistake at that point. So if you track things well, and again, we're going to talk about what to track in more detail later, but if you track things well, you should be able to see certain things trending in the right direction in that 72-hour period, so that you know that that was just a response to the acute rather than under recovery or not recovering properly, and you start to go the wrong way. And that fatigue, you'll stay tired. This is one of the earliest warning signs that you're going into overreaching, is that you will stay tired, but you won't be able to sleep properly. Okay. That's your body's stress hormones kicking in so that you can carry on functioning. But part of the job of cortisol is to keep you awake and keep you going. So now it's going to start impacting your sleep. And then the second thing that it's going to start to impact is your appetite. So you'll just stop feeling hungry, because again, cortisol is supposed to keep you awake, on the move, functioning under stress. You don't have time to stop and eat and drink. So yeah, the first and obvious thing is that fatigue goes beyond 72 hours. And then if we really start to push it, those are the symptoms that will start to kick in.
You got me confused here. You said that was the symptoms of overreaching. Is that symptoms of overreaching or overtraining?
So look, overreaching and overtraining are the two sides of the same sword. Okay. So the overtraining is the result of continuous overreaching. So you keep pushing through that and go, I'm in peak marathon training. Of course, I'm supposed to be tired. And we just keep going. And that's when we get into overtraining. And the overtraining is far harder to deal with than the overreaching, because the overreaching is the short-term impact of ignoring the acute. So it's the moving into the chronic before it becomes chronic.
And that's what makes this quite difficult, though, Lindsay, because these aren't distinctive things. They're on a continuum, and like most things in physiology, it's not an on-off switch. There's lots of gray areas, and it's easy to, because it doesn't happen overnight, it's easy for it to slowly over time morph into something more serious.
Exactly. And that's where monitoring is important. And look, with the tools that we have nowadays, it's just so mega easy to keep track. HRV has become super convenient because almost every wearable now automatically tracks HRV. Don't worry so much about the accuracy of it. If you are tracking you over time, it's a very useful tool. Tracking things like resting heart rate, keeping a diary of how you're feeling, and that how you're feeling should include quality of sleep. Do you fall asleep easily? Do you fall asleep quickly, but then wake up in the night and struggle to go back to sleep? How tired are my legs every day when I'm training? So the more kind of data you gather, how's my appetite, how much am I eating, but the more things you track over time, the easier it is for you to recognize normal things that impact you for a couple of days at a time and things that carry on beyond that point.
Linz, I'm going to ask this question again because it's a continuum. I think it's really difficult. But obviously, when we're training, we put our body under stress. So training is stress. I mean, you said it often that the body can't differentiate between good stress and bad stress. Stress is stress. But when does good training stress cross the line into harmful fatigue?
I think when you stop paying attention to the signs and how you're feeling, and honestly, that typically happens when we start training for marathon. So I don't want to say people are more sensible up to the half marathon, but there's definitely more of a fear factor when people want to go beyond the half marathon because they feel like they've got to be so much better prepared and that the marathon is so hard and so far, and they feel that because of that they've got to work so hard, and that it's a normal feeling to go through like 4 to 6 to 8 weeks of just feeling tired all the time. And again, we want to drive some fatigue. And so we do want to experience days of fatigue. And by days, I don't mean days in a row. There will be days in your training where you will be pretty tired and feel pretty beat up. But really, that shouldn't be more than 2, maximum 3 days a week. The rest of the week, the training you're doing should be giving you energy and you should be feeling stronger as you're going along. Um, and again, acute always means short. So when all the training tools that are available on the internet, the definition between acute load is 7 days versus 40 days. Okay. So if we look at it like that, you should never be feeling knackered beyond a week. So if you are really struggling for a week or more, you've gone way past the definition of acute by anybody's definition of that word. And if you don't intervene at that point, that's when you're going to go into the overtraining. And the overtraining doesn't take a couple of days to fix. That takes a couple of weeks to fix, which obviously means that your actual race is going to be a problem.
Yeah, Lindsay, it's interesting. You talk about the tools that are online, and we're going to dig into some of the metrics that we can track. And there are some online tools, but also sort of wearables that we use. But before we do that, you touched on the physical signs that can indicate that you're experiencing this cumulative fatigue. Let's dig into those a little bit more. Like, what are some of the red flags to look out for physically and physiologically, emotionally when it comes to this sort of thing?
So I mean, again, let's kind of shift it on a continuum because it's quite a nice way to look at it. So obviously, the short-term impact of being very, very tired is often a bit of irritability and impatience. So, that kind of thing might happen from time to time in your training cycle, and I'd say that's kind of okay. Then if we roll beyond that, like mild impatience and irritability into like plain old grumpiness and single word answers, and you feel like you kind of everybody's annoying you and you are like snapping at your family and friends, I'd say that's moving into the kind of realm of the overreaching. And then into the overtraining, well, you may not personally recognize the symptoms, but your friends and family will, and that will be sliding into the depression kind of thing, starting to withdraw, always quiet, always in a bad mood, never feel like you're getting enough sleep. So I would kind of say that's probably your continuum. Almost like you would go into almost like I can't think of the phrase that I'm trying to, but you'll go into kind of trying to chase every ordinary high. So maybe, increasing your screen time to try and find things that cheer you up, watching more TV, definitely less motivated for doing any kind of household chores or tasks outside of just getting through your workday. You'll find yourself sitting at your desk. And again, I can talk to some of these things from personal experience. You kind of sit at your desk, and the only thing that you are focused on is to getting to the point where you can just get home and sit on the couch. Like, so you're not focused on the task at hand. You're always just thinking about the next time you can do nothing. That's, I would say, when you're really getting into the dark spots of the overtraining.
Linz, let's talk a little bit about sort of the practical applications and how we track this. I mean, you mentioned HRV and that sort of thing. What are some of the tools that we've got readily as runners that we can use to sort of make sure that we're not going into these like pushing so far that we sort of flirting with danger?
Yeah, so look, the wearables are a great one because they're easy, but I have to just hit them with the asterisk, especially when the device is telling you overreaching. Like because of the 7-day versus 40-day, it is an algorithm. It's not only taking into account how you are physically feeling, it's working on like a predictive model of 7-day load versus 40-day load. So your watch can often scream at you that you're overreaching when you're nowhere near the point of overreaching. So that's why I'd say rather track individual metrics. Resting heart rate is a great one. And then HRV is also a really good one. And you need to track those things over time. And we're not looking for the 1 day, 2 day problem. So if you see that, like you've got a low HRV or a high resting heart rate for 2 days, don't let that worry. When it goes into day 3 and day 4, that's the point at which we have to intervene. So again, because we've got this continuum, if the acute was so acute that it's pushing us into overreaching, our bodies will tell us in 3-4 days. And if we react at that point, one full rest day, sometimes two if you've really overdone it, and the problem will be gone. Often what people will do in that point is go, okay, well, I'll just train a little bit less. And that can work, but what is the little bit less? And what's the right intensity for the little bit less? And that's very hard to work out. And so it's much easier to just rest. And typically what will happen when you do that rest is you'll have some cracking sleep, and then you will feel much, much better very quickly. So I wouldn't even go into the how much can I tweak. Should I? Honestly, 24 to 48 hours of rest should see you feeling miles better. Now, sometimes, and this is where this kind of continuum comes, sometimes the creep can be slow. So the changes are so small that even though we look at them every day, they don't look like they are different. And that's easy for even a trained coach to make that mistake, is that the slow trickle. And this is where the continuum is quite interesting, because with that slow trickle, you obviously don't feel too bad. And that's why I said earlier, keep a diary, because you might feel okay, but the things like the actual sleep quality, the struggling to fall asleep, the appetite starting to go down, those are things that might help you recognize before it actually gets too late and you've kind of pushed through the overreaching because of this slow creep of overload, not enough recovery weeks, or whatever kind of mistake you've made there. And then suddenly you just feel awful, like you've got nothing left to give. And before I started coaching and I was training really, really hard for triathlon, I often used to describe this feeling of when I woke up for training sessions, sometimes it would feel like my mattress was sleeping on me. Okay. That's how hard it was for me to get out of bed. And those are the days that I'd roll over and just go back to sleep. And so you'll have, and this is why it's important to track and monitor, because I think if you learn to recognize the signs that for you are too much, then you can make those decisions at the right time. Otherwise, that slow creep can happen. And then if we get into overtraining, it's not 1 week and 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. It's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks sometimes to fix that problem. We haven't even touched on nutrition, but often that's something that can accelerate us getting certainly into the overreaching place. because we're just not providing our body what it needs to recover from the training. So then the training is too hard for what we're providing ourselves with. It's not necessarily the training per se that's too much. We're just not looking after ourselves in a way to make that training sustainable.
Yeah, before we dig a little bit deeper into that nutrition, Linz, I had a very interesting thing happen to me on Thursday, and it's so funny that you talk about that continuum, and I almost and I might be wrong here, but I almost feel that slow creep is more dangerous than overdoing it for a few sessions in a row, because you know if you overdone it for a few sessions in a row. But I mean, we talk about it so often too, where running your easy runs easy enough, and if you're running a little bit too hard, even if it's like the top end of zone 2, bottom end of zone 3, it doesn't feel that bad at the time. But if you keep doing that over and over, you get this cumulative. And I had an example of that on Thursday. So I ran with our running club on Thursday, and it was quite a small group. And the normal people that I run with, I say the normal, not that the others are abnormal, but the group that I normally run with, let me rather put it that way, weren't there. So I ended up running with a group that was slightly quicker than me. And I felt fine during the run, but I could feel that I was overreaching during the run. And the next day I was so sore, and I was like maybe 30, 40 seconds a kilometer faster than what I'd normally run. And it was supposed to be an easy run. And I was like, it's so easy that even if it's 20 seconds, okay, faster, you might not be that sore the next day. But if you keep doing that over and over, that's where you end up in these sorts of situations.
Yeah, 100%. And so I didn't finish talking about the heart rate monitoring, and that's where I don't always coach people using heart rate for their actual sessions. And that's also why it's great to get accurate wearables, because when we get into this overreaching stage, so now it's beyond the acute and we enter the overreaching before we get to the overtraining stage, one of the real classic signs is elevated heart rate on easy runs and stunted heart rate on hard runs. So that's normally a really good sign that we're in this kind of overreaching phase. Now, that doesn't even speak to what you're talking about, which is that we are now running with too high a heart rate and we're doing too much damage. But what you are talking about can push us into what I'm talking about. So in the early stages of the overreaching, you might still hit your numbers on the speed work, but your heart rate will be lower. And that's easy to mistake it for I'm getting fitter. Okay. So the early signs of it are now encouraging. But if we couple that with the fact that our easy runs, provided we're running at similar pace, the heart rate now suddenly is higher, which speaks to being less fit or under stress. Okay. Now, if we push that just a little bit further along, as we get towards the end of the overreaching continuum, you'll start struggling to reach your paces and have the stunted heart rate. You will have much more cardiac drift on your easy runs than you normally do, especially in your heart runs. And then when we go into the overtraining, you won't be able to get your heart rate up. So your heart rate then suddenly tanks, whether you're running easy runs or whether you're running fast. And because the fast often has long rest periods, we can still muddle through it. We maybe not quite as fast as we'd like to be, but we're close enough that we can just write it off to being tired. I'm training for a marathon. I just can't quite hit my paces. No problem at all. But the fact that your heart rate now won't go up during the long and easy runs, that's where you should have these training platforms should actually have an alarm on them that just pings you constantly to tell you that that is like now a proper warning sign that you're moving into overtraining. Because what's happening is that your body is trying to recycle fewer muscle fibers at a time and sharing the workload out. Okay, so your muscles are working in relay, and because fewer muscle fibers are working, the demand drops for energy, so your heart rate comes down. And your body just won't let you access all of those muscle fibers because it knows you can't. And so that demand stays low and your heart rate doesn't go up.
That's super interesting. Lindsay, let's touch on nutrition now. And I remember it was in the early days of this podcast. You spoke about you're not under recovering, you're not over, what was that? There's no such, it's
Yeah, under
the feeling.
recovery. So it's
Yeah.
a different way of wording it. It's like, are you overreaching or are you under recovering?
Yeah, and the fueling, you're not like you're under fueling or over recovering, like that sort of thing. So talk to us the impact of not fueling properly, particularly when it comes to recovery, and how that impacts this. If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsay and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, in the literature, about a year to a year and a half ago, there was massive. Everybody was writing and talking about REDS, relative energy deficiency syndrome, and it's something that female athletes in particular have dealt with for years. But it became common enough now amongst males that it was sort of it was the fad of the moment to talk about it about a year ago. But it's an actual genuine problem, ongoing problem, that if you don't fuel for the work that you're doing, you are going to slowly slide into this. So that's, I think, to your point, the two things that look, the slower something happens, the harder it is to pick it up, the later it is when you pick it up, and therefore when you figure it out, it's often too late. Okay. And that's this kind of slow overreach, which you're talking about, constantly doing easy runs too hard. And the new the new fad at the moment, by the way, everyone, is now to knock zone 2 training. So suddenly and this happens all the time. You get people, I don't know if they just want to be noticed, or we have to say controversial stuff, but at the moment we're on the zone 2 is junk miles. But to your point, if you fall into that trap and you listen to that nonsense, you get this very slow, gradual overreach. And if you do not fuel yourself for the training that you are doing, and that's why any decent nutritionist, dietitian will always prescribe you a nutrition plan based on your activity level, because we need to fuel for the activity, and we have to fuel for the recovery from that activity. And if we don't get that right, it's a very slow poison. And back to what I was talking about early on, is that humans were designed to get through fairly lengthy periods of stress. That is why we have stress hormones. That's why we've got adrenaline to get through like very acute stressful situations. And we've got cortisol to get through chronic stressful situations. And those are effective. And it's why we can ignore or not even notice some symptoms for weeks. And then boom, like one of the real signs of, or symptoms rather, or is it not symptoms, one of the things that's caused by this long exposure of poor nutrition and overtraining is low red blood cells, low iron, low hemoglobin. And it's like, I'm fine, you feel fine today, tomorrow you are done. Lifting your arm is like, oh my word. You go and get tested and the doctor's like, geez, how have you been functioning like this? Well, it's because of the stress hormones. But then we get to a point, boom, we've fallen off a cliff. We've got chronically low iron, chronically low hemoglobin. There isn't a quick way to fix that. And so our goal starts to really be in jeopardy, because if we don't now take drastic action, we're actually getting into a point where we're impacting our health, never mind our performance.
I have to laugh when you talk about the phases where we go through, where people are all in on zone 2 and then it's like all against zone 2. And independently, you obviously are seeing it in the forums and that you are online, but I obviously monitor the the comments on our YouTube channel. And let me tell you, Lindsay, we are in the middle of it, because every time we post a video that is about zone 2, man alive, we have all the haters are us, like every single one of them. And I just, it's not even worth responding, because we know that the pendulum is going to swing, and then we're going to have the others again. So
yeah, look, and it's, we emphasize it so much, not because we are such believers that zone 2 is the miracle. Okay, I actually read on one of the forums that I'm on. That was the question: is zone 2 the miracle, whatever it's made out to be? No, it's not. It's the staple for everything. But because it's the thing in running that most commonly gets done incorrectly, we spend a lot of time trying to explain why zone 2 is so important in many, many different ways, because everybody receives the message differently. It does come across that we feel like everything should be slow. No, the majority of your work should be slow.
And that's
sorry, that's the key.
Yeah, if I can jump in, because that is just looking at the comments, particularly in the last week, that is the point that so many people are missing. We're not saying everything needs to be in zone 2. You do need higher intensity running, but you don't need to be running every session as hard as you can. And if you use the analogy of building a house again, Lindsay, like when you're building a house, when you're laying the foundation, it's not sexy. It's flipping boring. Like nobody comes to look at your foundation. Like that's what it boils down to. But if you're just building walls because walls are cool and windows are cool, there's nothing for it to stand on. You have to have the foundation, and the foundation of solid running is a big aerobic base, and that's what you do running zone 2. And that's not even, I'm not a sports scientist, but that's my understanding of it.
Yeah. Look, and to your point, Brad, even if you only have time to run very low volumes, okay, so let's say you only have 3 days a week and 1 hour 3 times a week to train for running. That's all you've got. If you did all of those 3 hours at a high intensity, you will still slowly slide your way into this kind of overreaching, overtraining, because that's just not how our bodies were designed to function and operate, not from a performance point of view. So if you are wanting to it's not the right word, but if you're looking to be healthy, maintain a healthy weight, maintain a healthy heart, fine. Then you can look at this thing with the maximum number of calories. How can I burn the maximum number of calories in these 3 hours, knowing that you're carrying a pretty high injury risk with that line of thinking anyway? Or if you go, I've got 3 hours to train a week and I want to run a fast 5K, 10K, 21, whatever it is, then what is the best use of my time? And then when you break that down, you've still got to train the right physiology to give you the best chance of doing the best you can do with that amount of time. To do that, you've got to go with the right ratios. Maybe you can get away with a slightly higher ratio of high intensity because you are going to have much longer in between, but you're still not going to be miles away from the 80% aerobic, 20% anaerobic. You might be able to get away with like a 70-30 without risking injury and all the rest of it. But anyway, we've kind of gone away from it, but it's honestly that slow poison, whether it's the nutrition or whether it's the easy runs being done too hard. It's that slow poison that gets us to a point where at worst we arrive overreached on race day. So we're feeling reasonably good, but we just don't understand why we keep doing badly in our marathon. Or we go all the way into the overtraining, which is even before race day, you just know, well, this is going to be horrible.
Yeah, Lindsay, it's interesting you made those the two differentiate, or the differentiation between the two, because often we talk about performance and we say to people this is the way you should train, but we very performance based, that like you want to improve, you want to become the best runner that you can become, like you want to run the best time that you can run now. You might not be running PBs in your 60s, but you might be wanting to run a season's best, as an example. And then there's the flip side of that coin of people who just want to run because they enjoy running, and they enjoy the health benefits, they enjoy the way it makes them feel, and they want to keep running for as long as humanly possible. And the challenge is I don't know. This is just me thinking it's hard to do both. Like if you want to run 7 days a week, you're never going to be the best runner you can be. But like for somebody like myself, because I do need recovery. But I understand where people are coming from, that they feel like they want to run 7 days a week. And the danger of running 7 days a week is pushing yourself into one of these holes. And that's where we're talking about now, particularly as we get older. And that's what I wanted to ask you is, what are some of the considerations? I mean, obviously this affects everyone, from 20-year-olds right the way through to 70, 80-year-olds. But obviously, as we get older, the margins for error and the sort of the leeway we've got for getting these things wrong becomes less as we get older. But what are some of the considerations and adjustments that runners over 50 should be making when it comes to overreaching, overtraining, and making sure we don't push ourselves into that hole?
Look, the people must be so bored of this example, but there just isn't a more classic one, and that is the cutting down the number of days when we are older. And that's for very good runners. And look, it's hard, Brad. Like now that I'm 48 today, it's hard to make that mental shift. I'm training for Berlin in 11 weeks' time. Tutu is there helping me along with that. I trust him, and he's got me running 5 days a week. And I am so used to running 6 days a week when I run a fast marathon. It's a difficult mental shift to make. So I get it. I know it's hard, but it's honestly the single biggest change you can make to improve your body's ability to recover as you get older, because everything does work less slow. Like everything is a bit slow. You do things bending down to pick stuff up. Like you asked me earlier, do I feel old? And I mean, I don't as I sit here, but honestly, when I pick things up behind my kids, I'm like, geez, why did that feel like that? I just got back from a trip to the Kruger where I was throwing cooler boxes on and off the back of a 4x4, and you just think to yourself, flip, that used to be, I didn't even used to think about this. Now I'm going like, be careful how you pick this up, Lindsay. Like, so we just have to acknowledge that things are slowing down. And the biggest change you can make if you were a 7-day-a-weeker is to go to 5 to 6 days a week. And in the short term, or not even in the short term, we're talking about running, because running has the highest eccentric load. It's got the highest impact on bones, ligaments, tendons. But if you start replacing some of those sessions with easy cycling, you can still, if you feel like you need that dose every day, that's something that can really just improve the recovery, because we're removing that eccentric load. But honestly, there isn't a more effective way than to just go from 7 days to 5 days, or 6 days to 5 days, or 5 days to 4 days as we move into our, I would say, 55, 60 years old, even your really top end 55, 60-year-olds, 4 days a week. I mean, my father's now 75. He's 75, and he was complaining to me yesterday that he's training for cross country. Their cross country is only 4Ks, and he's moaning that he can only keep 5 minutes a K for the 3Ks. Like if he really wants to be competitive at nationals, he's got to do 4 kilometers at 5 minutes a K. So he started off saying, I can only hold 5 minutes K for 3Ks. And I was like, geez, Dad, like I honestly hope I can run 5 minutes a K
74.
for 3Ks when I'm 75 years old,
75.
But honestly, that's just my point, is like he is able to just keep crushing it because he runs 4 days a week, occasionally 5. I've caught him cheating every now and then. But so he does. And again, to my point, is it's not an easy emotional change to make. But he's done it now for 20 years, and he is still running under 2 hours for a half marathon at 75 years old. I mean, what better evidence do you need?
No, exactly, Lindsay, and that's just to sort of sum up. And I think to wrap this up is probably a good place is exactly here. And the challenge particularly for people who feel like they need that dose of exercise every day just for their wellness and mental health and that sort of thing. The challenge is you can do it for a while, but as you get older, that cumulative fatigue builds up and it starts pushing you down this continuum that when you're forced to stop, you're forced to stop for a long time. So you almost need to take the hit early on, go, you know what? I'm cutting back from running 7 days a week to I'm running 5 days a week. And then on the other 2 days, I'm going to do a swim or I'm going to do a cycle just to pull it back slightly so that you don't end up in that hole. Because that I think is what our fear is if we're forced to stop. And then all of a sudden, it's weeks of no training at all. And what does that do for us physically, mentally? And that's the challenge. You almost need to go, you know what? I'm taking it now so that I can keep doing this for longer.
100%. And look, not to open a whole new can of worms that needs its whole own discussion, but for both performance and for health, we also have to find room in all of this for strength training. You know, and so if we don't make the change, if we don't do the strength training, we're on an accelerated slide to not being able to run, then not being able to walk, then not being able to look after ourselves. Okay, so that's the accelerated slide if we don't do something about making sure we stay strong. So strength training it's simply not negotiable, particularly once you are over 50. But the sooner you start, the better. That's the message. And because of that, we've got to make room elsewhere to make sure that we don't overreach. You know, it's like an injury, Brad. You know, we always talk about an injury is if you pick an injury up early. So if you or not pick it up, if you acknowledge it, it's better word for runners, because we know, but we choose to ignore. But if you have an injury and you acknowledge it, that will typically not keep you away from training for more than 48 hours, maybe 72. When we ignore it and we push that niggle into an actual injury, it can take anything from 7 days to 6 weeks to heal, depending on how badly we mess ourselves up. This is exactly the same. If we really keep these tight records, and when we move beyond that acute window, so 48 to 72 hours, if we don't see our physiology starting to come back after 48, 72 hours, if we ignore it, we push ourselves into a space where we now have to take time off running. And if we ignore it some more, we get to the point where we could be off running for 2 weeks to 6 weeks to get it sorted out.
Yeah, and Linz, I was going to ask you, like, what's the most important message you want runners to understand about fatigue and overtraining? And that's probably it, is just be honest with yourself. We know, and yeah, listen to your body, I think, is probably the big one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Linz, as always, thank you so much for doing this, especially on your birthday. I know you are wanting to spend time with the family, so thank you for spending time with us, and we look forward to catching up again next week. Thanks for your time, bud.
Big pleasure, Brad. Runners are my family.